presentation, how can we improve our knowledge and understanding so that we are confident after this webinar in taking through the minutes. So starting with the first thing, why minutes are important. So minutes are important because of two main reasons. One, because of the legal significance, the courts consider the minutes only as the conclusive evidence of what happened at the board meeting. Two, it also helps the organization and their boards in driving the decision, taking the decision, and see to it whether the decisions are getting implemented and how they can take the organization forward. So first, it provides legal protection, fair enough, because we know courts take this as evidence. It gives us the structure. When somebody, third person, reads the minutes, through reading the minutes, one would get to know what really board discussed to arrive at a decision. So it's very important that minutes capture the essence of the decisions and why a decision was taken. The effective minutes would be one that would drive the action. And in further slides, we will help you to really get you know as to how to prepare those effective minutes that can drive the action. And once the minutes are such which are action oriented, they will assist in measuring the progress at each stage. Since the minutes will define as to why the decisions are taken, there will be an ownership of decision on the directors, and they will abide what we call as a cabinet solidarity for the decisions they take. And minutes act as reminder each time as to what board desired and has that been achieved or not. So all these things are important to make sure that we have got effective minutes, but how do we really get through them? We'll see in the further slides.
Thanks, Ansel. So before I go on, we should have said at the beginning too that if you've got any questions or examples you want any feedback on, please put your hand up and ask questions. We'd like it to be as interactive as possible this session, and Ansel and myself are happy to answer any questions or provide any feedback. So kicking off, as everyone knows, the board minutes have to reflect who was in attendance, the date, decisions, and including any action items or follow-up that need to be listed out in the minutes. Very important for legislative reasons and for follow-up if there's actually any discussions about what was decided. They importantly record the decisions. They always should be not individual people's comments, but actually very concise and complete regarding what was discussed and the reasons for those decisions, but not used as a mechanism for people to put opinions in. They don't normally need to include the mover or seconder. Lots of boards, particularly the chairs, like to have those situations in place, but that's just a preference, not actually physically required. They're not required to be a transcript of what happened and all the different discussion points. They need to be a report on what happened and what was clearly discussed and decided. They should be impartial and objective, and you need to make sure that they have the language that if a person who wasn't in attendance to the meeting could still understand what was discussed at the meeting. So it's very important that the language and the explanations are very clear. If there's contention, we suggest that you do the minutes live and no recording. In some organisations I've worked where directors would refuse to have minutes recorded because they actually said that limited discussions as well and opinions. And
what does minutes live exactly mean?
When you minutes live, if you're taking a recording, some directors don't like to be recorded. And they prefer not to. But that sort of needs to be counted by if you're destroying the recording straight after the minutes have been finalised and signed off at the next meeting, some directors will accept that.
But what does the phrase "do minutes live" actually mean? Does it mean I write it down and everybody sort of like I read it out and everyone agrees that that's what's going to be in the minutes?
Yeah. So you can prepare the minutes there on so that everyone, whatever contentions they have, that gets recorded and it's confirmed to them that, okay, this is what is being recorded, and the minutes gets finalized. You spend an extra half an hour and do it there itself.
Okay.
And as we've said, They are private unless your constitution says to the contrary. The preference is not to let members have a look at the minutes because they're directors' minutes, and they might have some confidential information. They might have discussions about certain executives that if we're out in the marketplace, it mightn't be actually the best use of that organisation's business. And it gives a bit of privacy. So discussions are actually robust and people do give opinions and you move forward with positive actions. If you had to constantly go back to members and advise them about minutes, it'd be a very slow process. And lastly, as we'll touch on in later cases, the minutes have to demonstrate that they are a correct record. So it's really important when the minutes are done that at the subsequent meeting of directors, they are signed off as correct, and the chair would normally go around the meeting and ask the attendees to confirm that that was their understanding of the minutes as well. So it's really important in case history as well. So.
Yeah. So just taking cue from Steve, I think the short things will be that key takeaways from what Steve has just said will be try to use lesser of adjectives and the languages where it seems that it's already a biased thing that is being said. So be very factual when you are preparing the minutes. Use summarized language rather than exactly A said this and B said this. Avoid using the flowery or a very typical technical language with lots of jargon so that it can be easily comprehended by the ones who are reading. So easy language, summarized, some clear and succinct minutes will be helpful.
Yeah, so basically in the process of confirming and finalising the minutes, it's important to get everyone's confirmation and understanding. The usual process in most organisations, if you have a separate company secretary to the CEO, will be for the company secretary to actually provide a copy of the draft minutes to the CEO for review, because the CEO and his executive team would normally be the people that are doing the action items that are disclosed in the minutes. So really important that the CEO gets a heads up and also gets some ability to make sure that the action items or minutes actually record what is required to be completed, rather than those minutes reflect something that the CEO can't achieve or would not be achieved in the time frame that's requested as well. So it's really important the CEO's involvement. Obviously then the minutes would normally go to the chair, and usually you try to do that in a short space of time. And that way the chair's got a fresh memory of what happened in the meeting, can be very accurate in describing what was discussed, and also agree on what the actions on them. The other part that's important is making sure that if there's contentious minutes and different parts of the meeting have been contentious, that you probably do include the directors in the review of the minutes. Some organisations always give the chair and all directors an ability to review the minutes. That can be time consuming if you have to go to every director, and not every director comes back with an answer. But if there is contentious parts of the minute, it's probably a good way to lock the directors into the discussion. And then when you go to the actual follow-up meeting, that minutes are confirmed regularly, quite quickly and efficiently. You don't get constant, the minutes would change subject to the following amendments. So it's really important on that basis. So did anyone have any questions on that? Because it's really important of the process, whether you bring the directors in, that it doesn't delay the minutes going out, because you want to get the minutes out with the next agenda and the pack basically. Okay.
With this, Steve, can we have our full question?
Yeah.
So how are the minutes signed in your organization? Physically in the wet signature, or it's done electronically through email confirmation, or if they are not signed at all? Okay, so here we go. Nobody is signing physically the minutes. That's fair enough. In this time, it's hard to get the minutes physically signed. Electronically, 2 of us are getting the minutes signed electronically, and 4 of us are not getting the minutes signed. Okay. Steve, would you like to say something about this?
I think it's very important to have a bit of a discussion around this, because the minutes are actually the recording of what happened at a particular meeting. To not have them signed leaves them, one, subject to changes if they might be changed, and 2, you're not locking in all the directors. As we said, a board should be functioning as a whole. So by having the minutes confirmed and signed, that's making sure that the board as a whole agrees with the minutes. So you can't have a director in 2 months' time say, I didn't think that's what we meant by those minutes, or find gaps in the minutes. Really important to actually get everyone in agreement, and agreement quite quickly. You don't want minutes to linger on. Like we said, they should be confirmed at the subsequent meeting, and also confirmed during that process of leading into that meeting. If anyone wants any changes, you incorporate those into those and have marked changes to take to the meeting. You don't want meetings staying unsigned for a long period of time, because then there is the ability that people might try and change them. The other thing we found as well is minutes sometimes are signed off by an email. We probably prefer that you would sign it off by a signature or some sort of mechanism that the chairman signs off, and you actually very clearly say in the next subsequent minutes that the minutes were approved and signed. Once you don't sign them, you leave the avenue open for disagreement, and you don't operate as a fully operational board. So really key. So probably any comments about why you wouldn't be able to get the minutes at least signed by the chair, because it's only the one person having to sign them. And that might be like a signature block or something like that. Did anyone who had the not signed had any comments about how we could help improve that process?
Okay, we have a question. Is it just at the end of the minutes? So yes, like from my experience, what in my previous organization, what we used to do was the full signature would be at the last page once the minutes are completed. So there is no other matter whether the last line usually says, and then the chair signs. And the other pages, the chair would just initial to make sure that subsequently there is not even an iota of doubt that somebody replaces the page. So just to make sure that this is the final version of minutes. So basically what we are suggesting is once we have these signed minutes, it's for everyone to be sure that this is the final version that we have. Because once the meeting is done and after the minutes are finalized, there are different versions of somewhere a comma gets changed and and these kind of things. And we don't want to be confused by after 3 months or 6 months, that which is the final version. So once we have a signed copy, it practically helps us to be reassured that this was the final copy which was signed, approved, and has been seen by all of us. So it is very helpful to get the signatures of the chair on the minutes. So maybe the next steps for you would be to start this process of getting the signatures of the chair from the next meeting.
The other thing, if a worst case, you should at least get an email from the chair agreeing with those, and he should CC maybe all the other directors in, if the worst case. So everyone is very clear that these are as Ansel said, these are the final minutes. There's no ability to change them, and people can refer back to them. So I think it's so important to have some sort of closure at the minutes at that point are signed off and complete, and you move forward.
Yeah.
So if the minutes are signed and if the wet signature, is that the copy that actually has to go in the minutes book? If you have the physical minutes book as well, or could they sign it, scan it, and then it's still the same?
So the legal requirement is the minutes have to go into the minute book within 1 month of the meeting. Whereas as far as the signatures are concerned, we were just coming to the legal requirements. The legal requirements do not actually specify the time within which the minutes should be signed. And whether it's a state legislation or it's the Commonwealth legislation, so the Corporations Act, all of them say that minutes should be signed within a reasonable time, and the time has not been defined. So what we would recommend is the best or the ideal situation would be to get the minutes approved by the chair, signed by the chair within a month's time, and these signed minutes should go into the minute book. However, if for some reason the chair did not sign the minutes, however, the minutes have been confirmed, they should at least go into the minute book. And the minutes can be signed by the chair of next meeting as well. So you have the time for getting the minutes signed. But to put into the minute book, getting the minutes approved by the chair and putting in the minutes book is important to be done within a month.
And if the chair decides that he likes the minutes and he's going to sign them, and, you know, I mean, somebody else comes back later and says, oh, look, I've been sick or away or whatever, and I've got these major problems with it, what's the consequence?
The consequence is you also take these minutes to the next meeting for confirmation. So if we go back to the process, what Steve talked about, I'll just go back a slide. So if we see the 10th number point, the minutes should always be confirmed at the next meeting. Now these minutes, if chair has also approved, they go to the next meeting where we have a standing agenda item for discussion on the previous minutes. There, the director can bring up the points that the director feels are important and should be a part of the minutes. And under that agenda item, they get recorded. So previous minutes will not be changed because they have already been approved, but the amendments can be noted in that meeting. That, you know, the previous meeting minutes will be amended to the extent of A, B, C, D, E, if all the directors agree to what has been proposed by that particular director.
So if someone's checking the minute book and they read the minutes for the date of the meeting, and it's 2 years ago, they have to look at read every other minutes completely to find out whether somebody has subsequently had a problem with those minutes and made some amendment.
So not the whole minute.
Just in case.
Yeah, not the whole minute.
But you don't know which part might have been disputed.
Right. No. I think I should explain you again. So it's if I say the meeting held in June, so somebody wants to see June 2020 minutes. So that person will read the June 2020 minutes, and the next meeting happened in August 2020. So he will go to the August 2020 minutes and just look at the item confirmation of June minutes. And whatever amendments are there will be there only in that section, nowhere else.
But then, so if you don't do it at the August meeting, then you essentially legally agree with whatever the minutes are and things.
Yes.
So you can't wait till the November meeting.
No.
If for some reason you didn't pick something up or whatever, you can't say, oh, but. Okay.
Yes. In that case, you have lost that opportunity of getting this. And in fact, it's the other way around. Your confirmation has come on the minutes that have already been approved in the month of August.
Yep. Okay.
It gets back to the fact of the directors are functioning as a board as a whole. So that's why they need to be uniform in the discussion. And you do, as Ansel said, if they're in the June and August, there's a change. In the very first section, you'd put minutes for June were approved subject to the following change. And you just have a little in brackets or hyphenated minor change in there. But then you move on, basically.
Yep.
And I would anticipate any director, for their own liabilities and their own governance purposes, would like to see the minutes signed and approved, because then they know that's what we agreed at that point in time, because life moves on.
Yep.
Because the other tricky part is after a meeting finishes, sometimes people will have verbal discussions after the meeting, and you've got to make sure that they don't think that's included in the board minutes, because you closed it off at 10:30.
Yep.
Then 10:45, they talked about something else that goes to the next meeting.
Yep.
It's not this meeting. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. That was very useful. Now, coming to the legal requirements as provided in the Commonwealth Act, that is Corporations Act. So Section 251A talks about minutes. So subsection 1 says minutes must be kept in minutes book, which we discussed just now, within 1 month. So what all things should go in the minute books? So typically the minutes of board meetings, minutes of general meetings, so be it annual general meeting or special general meetings, the resolution passed by the members without holding a meeting, and similarly resolutions passed by directors without a meeting, which we call circular resolution or the out of session resolutions which are passed by the directors. And if the company is a proprietary company with only one director, the declaration made by the directors. Subsection 2 talks about signing of minutes, where again the minutes should be signed within a reasonable time. No time has been specified by any one of the following: chairman of the meeting or chairman of the next meeting. Because I think the legislators would have understood the fact that if a chair chairs a meeting and resigns the next day or after a week, who would sign the minutes? So that understanding was there. So in that case, the chair of the next meeting could sign. The company must ensure that minutes of passing of the resolution, out of session resolutions, are also signed by the directors within the reasonable time. So even those resolutions should be signed within reasonable time. A director of proprietary company with only one director must sign the minutes of making declaration that it's a single director company within a reasonable time again after the declaration is made. Now, where the minutes book must be kept, so minute books must be kept at registered office or principal place of business in jurisdiction or any other place as approved by ESIC, the regulator. Minutes so recorded and signed is the evidence of the proceeding, resolution, or declaration to which it relates, unless the contrary is proved. And hence the minutes are so important, because in case of any trouble or any dispute, the courts will only take minutes as the conclusive evidence, and it will be hard to prove the otherwise, because all the directors have seen, chairman has signed. Now, section 251B says that minute books for meeting of members and resolution of members passed without meetings are open for inspection of members free of charge. So there is a legal requirement of only providing the minutes and the resolution of members to the members for inspection. There is no legal requirement to provide the meeting of board or committee meetings to the members. And these copies which are being provided, they should be given to the member within 14 days on a payment of fee or otherwise, whatever is provided in the Constitution. Section 198F says that where there is a limitation on members to have access to the books of the organization, the directors, on the contrary, have access to all the books while they are on the board. And after ceasing to be a director, normally up to a particular time, which is usually 7 years, they have got the access to the company books. Section 1306 says a book that is required to be kept or prepared may be kept in a bound loose leaf book, a physical copy, as it used to be a couple of years ago. Recording or storing matters concerned by means of mechanical, electronic, other devices, which we are doing now. So we prepare online on a Word document and we save that scanned copy. Ensure matters recorded or stored will be capable at any time of being reproduced in a written form. So whatever form it is, be it physical or electronic, the last thing we want to make sure is they should be able to be reproduced whenever anyone wants an access to it. Now, in case of the State and Territory Incorporations Act, there are similar requirements only. However, not so detailed as we have in the Corporations Act, and that was the reason why we have put this one into the presentation. And some organizations who are registered charities, to them, the governance standards apply, which are prepared by ACNC, and directors who are called responsible entities under ANC. They have their governance standards applicable to them. And according to Section 111 of the Corporations Act, certain section of Corporations Act have been switched off for these charities because governance standards are applicable to them. But these governance standards are also equivalent to the ones that are provided in the Corporations Act.
Thanks, Nancy. So we
Yeah.
touched on previously a little bit about why members shouldn't have access to minutes. Bit of background, obviously, is the fact that the board governs the organisation, and it's very clear that they run the strategy, and the CEO is there for implementing the strategy and reporting back to the board. You don't need another level of interaction or intrusion during that process, because it's very key that the board members are in charge. The outcomes from the board meeting should be kept confidential. Members accessing that information might use it for their own purposes as lobby groups, or it's not too far a result that could end up that it would be in the press potentially as well. So really important that the board minutes are retained by the board members and kept confidential. Even the distribution of the board minutes is really key for confidentiality. If you're distributing them to board members for the review, we encourage you to use a secure portal or use a email system where they've got a code basically for privacy as well, rather than we've seen in some organizations, they just attach the minutes to an email. It doesn't take much for that email to accidentally be forwarded on to another group of people if you're not careful. We've also talked about directors discussing things more openly, and you'll actually get better results usually if the directors can discuss things robustly and move forward with a agreed outcome. And that way you don't have this ongoing, I don't want to, one director not commenting or being dominated by one director particularly. Also, you get to use the expertise of directors if they know that they won't be subject to members' scrutiny, because they might want that expertise and their views kept confidential from members as well. If a member was querying every type of decision or every type of section of the minutes, the business would be in a stranglehold basically, and everything would be delayed, decisions wouldn't be made, outcomes wouldn't be achieved. So very important to keep the minutes within the directors. And as we say in the bottom note, if members are unhappy with the outcomes of the board, they have the ability to elect new directors. So we'd encourage anyone to have a look at their constitution and ensure that it does not allow access to members for the board minutes from an operating point of view and a strategic point of view.
Thanks.
Yep.
So, I mean, if you want to get things done, you're going to, certainly for a non-professional or a volunteer group, you need to actually I don't know, really encourage them and, talk things through. So you've got a whole communication strategy, I guess, to make things happen, as against you just spending money that members who, I mean, this is not a superannuation fund. Your members they just hang around out somewhere else and wait for the money to come in. Here, nothing we do in our volunteer group is going to happen unless all the members do it as well. So, I mean, at some stage we must be telling them what decisions we've made, rather than just finding out 2 months later or 2 years later that we've implemented a training course and, oh, we forgot to tell anybody or get their input as to what they'd like to be trained on or something. Now, I know that I'm taking a narrow view of it, but
really that's an important point. We're not saying not to communicate with the members. I think we've got to have a distinguish here between minutes, which actually are decision-making recorded for legislative reasons, versus a communication process. And as you've said, you've got to actively encourage communication with the members. Some people would do it by newsletter, a monthly newsletter to their members. but they don't necessarily have to see the written and bound minutes for the board meeting. You can because that way, as we've said, the minutes actually need to be concise. Whereas if you do a communication or a release to members, you can actually put some flowery things in there or something that makes them feel good, where you won't put that in the minutes. So I think it's very important to distinguish between what statutory requirements are, the board minutes are, versus a communication plan with the members. So that would be one way I'd suggest as well. Did you
Okay, and yeah, I agree with that. And the word access to the minutes is also very broad. It doesn't mean they actually get to leaf through the minutes book. It means that they get to see a copy of or the page of the meeting that they're requesting information about.
If you want, I think you could actually, it depends what the action, what the motive of the members are. If the member just wants to confirm that there was an item that they were interested in, you might say, here's the paragraph that was in the board minutes, and you spell it out to them, read it out to them. Or if they're in agreement, you might do a bit of a cut and paste and show them. But if they're constantly asking for copies of sections and all that, that's going to stranglehold the business. If the members have got good intentions, as you said, they just want to understand where they're heading, I don't think it's a bad thing to give them an understanding what was discussed in the minutes. I wouldn't give them holus bolus, the whole director's minutes. You might do an extract and have a discussion with them. The other thing is always to have a relationship where you can have, say, the coffee meeting with members if you need to do as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And because some members will complain later on that they didn't know to ask questions about something because they didn't know that something was discussed. So is that sort of come back to if you like, a fault of the board in not communicating what directions they're heading?
I think what would happen is usually what the board discusses nearly in the first instance after you, at the beginning of a board meeting, you'll discuss if there's anything that's in the press, anything out in the marketplace, or anything that needs to be actioned and informed to members. If a really good operating board will do is that's nearly at the beginning of a meeting, they'll say, what's happened that we need to make a comment on and address that. And usually that will be very important, and a chair will bring it up, and then he'll ask the other directors, how do we want to handle this particular situation? If it's an operational thing, it might still fall back to the CEO. But if it's a strategic thing, like a marketplace or something like that, the directors will discuss it, and they'll agree on what the communication strategy for that is. So usually they should be on the pulse of what members are after. There might be an indication because it's in a press statement, someone or a newspaper journalist has brought it up, or a politician has brought it up. The directors would normally have a comment and a strategy to address that, so that members don't go off with, oh, didn't know about it. You need to inform them if something's out in the marketplace. So I think it's very much attuned to what people, and usually it might be a rumor, because directors also find out at board meetings, they'll say, oh, I've understood there's a rumor floating around. How do we want to address this? And then you'll have a strategy of how to address it. So it's really important that at the beginning of a board meeting, usually the chair will say, does anyone have any really key issues they want to discuss or anything they want to come back to? So a well-run meeting with a really good chair will get that really discussed at the front of the meeting, so you can action it, so you don't lose it at the end of the meeting or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to add to what Steve said, how member would know that where board is proceeding. So the idea would be to lay down a strategic plan by the board and share it with the members, where the members would know what are the priorities of the board, what during the year board wants to achieve during that year. So that is shared with the member, and at the board meetings also, the recommendation of AF would be to discuss as per the strategic plan as to what do we want to do on events, education, research. So those doc points and what board wants to decide on those matters. So in that case, and wherever the board has taken a decision, that can be informed to the members in the form of newsletters or magazines, which goes to the members saying that as per the strategic plan, we had a vision or a mission to achieve this, and the board has already taken a decision. So the members can really relate why the board is taking a decision, because it is flowing through from the plan, which was given to the members well before the year. So it will just fall in place. And we have a difference between the democracy, what members have, and the management, and really the confidential information that the board has, and criticality of the decisions that the board is taking.
The other thing is probably just pushing a bit further what Ansel was saying is the board, via the communication, will usually have a timeline that they issue to members on when things are going to happen, if they need to come back to members for approvals and all that. So the members are fully informed of what the process is, and at various cutoff points would be informed of, okay, we're on track, we've got the required market process in place, we've invented something that's going to go to market on this date. But, you know, so it's important to actually establish a timeline with the members of what the process will be.
Mm-hmm. And last little thing for this moment anyway, is there's a lot of discussion in the meetings, and some of those ideas are very useful. People can have their own notes of what's going on, but a lot of people will tend not to because they're involved in the discussion, something like that. So but if the secretary or whomever is taking notes, which they will condense into the official minutes later on, are those notes personal? Are they accessible in any way? Is there a legal rule about what you write down and what you don't? Because you might want to write down, yeah, I've got to find out whether I think so-and-so is doing something pretty shifty. You know, it's not really something you want to come out, but it needs to be followed up, for example.
Notes are relevant only till the minutes are finalized, approved by the chair. But once the minutes have been approved and signed, after that, the notes should be destroyed. Because in that case, there will be two evidences. If we see from the courts, there are two evidences. One is the notes and one is the minutes. And if there is inconsistency between two of them, there will be definitely a doubt on the accuracy of the minutes.
Yeah, it's very important to not have two versions of the minutes because once the minutes have been signed by the chair, everything else should be destroyed in those minutes. There has been cases around what directors believed were the minutes and kept their own minutes books as well. We'd encourage you to ensure that your directors also destroy their records. Yeah. So you don't have all these different interpretations, because in the cases, the statutory authorities have actually asked for copies of those board members' notes. So we'd encourage you not to carry anything forward, because that meeting's finished, it's closed, everyone's agreed on the actions. And really important for the secretary or the CEO to read back to the chair each section of the minutes so that the agreement is stopped at each point of the agenda. So it's pretty easy when you get to the end of the minutes, to end of the meeting, to say, okay, we've agreed on what the action items were. So I think if you're talking about subsequent actions to assist members, that might be a different discussion. You might say in the board minutes that we had questions from the members, or we had questions that we needed to go back to members, and you give an action for the CEO to provide further information to members or something like that. And you can use it that way, and then do the action itself outside the board meeting. Yeah.
Sorry, can I have a question here, please? Okay, if you know, as a member of the board, I have agreement on most of the aspect of the decisions for that day, but one or two issues I'm not agreeing with the other members of the board. Where should I record that? In the minute or in my notes, or how that would be recorded?
I'll comment first and then Ansel, if you like. So if a director violently disagrees with, say it's a resolution, the director can abstain from the vote, or actually ask the secretary to record that you are not in favour of the resolution and record it in the minutes. So you actually do have the ability to voice your disapproval, if you like, one by abstaining, or two by recording that you were not in agreement. As we said then, but after the discussion, you need to go forward as a board as a whole. If you ultimately feel that that particular resolution or that decision is not in the best interest as you being a director of that organisation, you could resign or tender your resignation.
So even if I'm disagreeing on one or two resolutions there, but the board overall, decided to go ahead. But so should I still take the responsibility for the decisions later on?
Yeah, what you'd probably do in that instance is, like I said, one is you could abstain from the overall resolution or the decision. Two, you could actually say you disagree, or you might ask them to record the alternatives discussed. And that way you say that the following alternatives were discussed. So that way your alternative, if you're in disagreement, is recorded in the minutes. You don't necessarily record it under a director's name, but you can show that discussion did occur and these were the alternative items discussed or alternative decisions that could have been made. Did you have a comment, Saul? Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's it. It's just making sure that if you're very uncomfortable with the approval items that the majority of the board is approving, in that case, please make sure that you either, as Steve said, dissent from the decision of the board and that gets recorded in the minutes, or you abstain from the decision that has been taken.
Thank you.
Just to keep yourself safe.
Quick follow-up questions regarding the absence from that, the meeting. Does it apply for the whole meeting, all of the resolutions, or just part of that particular resolution?
Part of it. It can work for the part of it as well.
Okay, so I can abstain,
yes,
or anyone can abstain from one resolutions and can still present for rest of the resolutions.
Yes. Okay. So either it can be a conflict of interest. If you have a conflicting interest, in that case also you can abstain, or if you're not in favor of what is being proposed, in that case also you can abstain from the decision at that particular item.
Thank you, because sometimes what happens, you still want to be in the board as a sort of to represent your cohort or your group, but you don't agree with
absolutely
with the resolutions.
Absolutely, you can definitely do that, but make sure that that gets adequately recorded in the minutes.
Yep. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
The other strategy as well, if the decision is not time critical, is if you request further information, that might be another way to get more discussion about it and to get other views on it before a final decision is made. So you don't then have to abstain or get recorded that you disagree. You might actually ask for further information to be provided before a decision is made. That's, like I said, if it's not time critical and if you're not doing it on every type of decision, because then the board will get nowhere in the meeting. But that's another way to do it. If you still feel uncomfortable, you might ask for further information as well.
And if a board member says, no, I really can't cope with this decision because it's just totally inappropriate in their view or something, if they then say, well, we either don't do it this way or I'm off, how does that get communicated to the membership? Because if it's supposed, like you'd have to say, well, Fred's resigned. Why has he resigned? Oh, I can't tell you why I've resigned because of board confidentiality. That completely defeats the whole point of, I mean, you're representing the board, the members, you're running it for the members in theory. And I really have a big problem with this idea that we don't trust the members to play game, which is sort of like the way it's all running. It's a bit like our elected representatives in Parliament. They seem to do whatever they feel like. It's got nothing to do with what we would generally want or seem as reasonable. So how do members get the real deal that the people really are acting on their behalf?
It might come down to, if someone resigns, they might have a comment that they have a difference on the strategy for the organisation going forward, and then the board would then have the opportunity to reiterate their strategy rather than criticising the other person's strategy. That might be one tactic of doing it. Is, you see often these general comments about people resigning and that, and you don't want to get into a situation of they resigned because blah, 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 because then you're criticising the ex-director. you might just say things around the strategy. There's differences on strategy views, and the board believes the following strategy is the right process, and you discuss it at an AGM. Probably is the other opportunity to discuss the board strategy at the AGM, and you're actually, since that board meeting or the board member left, you might say, we've done the following things to enhance our strategy. But you don't want to get into a name calling like we've talked about. You want to be still very business-like in that process. But some board members for different political, religious, or whatever might resign for certain things, and they have the avenue to do that.
Thank you, Robin, Steve. We have a question from Christina. She says, what is a resolution in context? So Christina, resolution is a motion or the decision, which we usually put in some specific words where we say that the board approves so-and-so contract to be awarded to so-and-so party. So these wordings are typically called a motion, and when it's approved, a resolution passed by the board. So it's just typical way of putting in the minutes the decision of the board.
Thanks, Ansel. Yeah, so picking up on Ansel's point, very important, the minutes do have lots of things in them. We've got a listing here, which we've already touched on in some of the minutes, obviously the name and type of the meeting, because there will be other types of meetings. Sometimes organisations have audit and risk committees, so it's really important to distinguish those from board meetings. Or if they're just a management meeting and they're not actually a board meeting, that directors may come in and meet with board management on certain items, but it's not a formal board meeting. Key to all of this is not only the place and date, but the starting and finishing time. As we've said, sometimes you actually have those corridor conversations after a board meeting, and it needs to be very clear that the board meeting has closed. And if directors want to raise those discussions, they do it at the next meeting. The meeting closure time closes all discussion, and they cannot be reopened for things that happen afterwards, because then you don't want to know when things started or finished, basically. The other key part is documenting the various attendances and invitations to people throughout the meeting, and that'll be driven by the agenda. So you might have, if it's a marketing discussion, you might have a marketing management executive come in and discuss points on the marketing section. So you should record under agenda item 3 or 4 to discuss the paper that was presented to the board. The marketing manager or a communication manager came in at 10:30. The following was discussed, and that marketing manager left the meeting at 11 a.m. So very important. The other really key part is making sure you understand when board members are absent for any time of the meeting. And that's critical in our era of Zoom meetings, because at least physically you can see when people are in and out of the meeting for convenience breaks or anything, but for long periods. So very important that you understand if a director is going to be absent, taking another call or leaving the Zoom meeting, because at that particular item, that agenda item might have needed the director's attention and director's views. And that way you can sign off at that agenda item that the decision made was approved by the board. And a director can't then say, look, I missed that part, I was on a phone call. So what you usually do is actually, when you send out the minutes with the agenda for the next meeting, request any directors to advise you if they'll be absent during any time of the meeting, if it is a Zoom meeting. So really important to use Zoom accurately and efficiently. Obviously the quorum, the meeting can't proceed if a quorum is not present, and the chair will declare that, and that'll be as per your constitution. The other key aspect is, before you kick into the meeting and get into the main part of the meeting, is declaration of conflicts of interest. As we've said in previous discussions, if you have a conflict of interest, you need to declare. It's how you handle that conflict of interest that's so important. And obviously the minutes of the previous meeting have to be attached. Also, any reference to any materials distributed or before or during the meeting, And sometimes you might have a late paper that will be shown as a separate section, and you document when that was sent out and received by the directors. So I've been in organisations where a director refuses to take late papers because he says if they've got the time to read it, then they'll make a decision. If they haven't, then it can be deferred to a next meeting. So if you're sending papers after the pack goes out, you need to actually list how they're addressed via the minutes. And obviously we've talked about leaving and entering the room, or leaving and entering the Zoom or Teams meeting. And lastly, obviously, is the closing time along with the chair's signature. So,
John, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, Stephen, you just mentioned the agenda. Does the agenda become a part of the minutes? Are they kept on record as well?
What you normally do is you use the agenda is for your.
You hear me?
Yeah, sorry. The agenda is used for the sequence of the minutes. So you try and follow the agenda, but you shouldn't drop the agenda into purely the minutes. You actually should try and reference it in and follow the agenda, because then everyone can see that the meeting was structured around the agenda and you didn't deliberately leave anything off the agenda because some director didn't want to discuss it or something. The agenda doesn't form part of the minutes, but it's actually a sequence of events for the minutes.
So generally, while writing the minutes, what we would typically say is the board paper was taken as read, and then the board discussed on the following points. So it's just to keep it brief, otherwise the minutes would become quite lengthy.
Yeah. The other good part is to set up prior to the board meeting, set up the minutes in a template with the agenda items, so you have space in there to fill out, as Angela said, that the paper was discussed or the paper was noted. So you actually do follow that process. So it's really good to actually, if you like, have a bit of a cut and paste into the template of what the agenda items are going to be, but not documenting every part of the agenda that was sent out.
Thank you.
Steve,
would you like to talk about this one?
Okay, so very much.
Can I just ask? Could I just ask another question that we've got up on the screen now? Inclusions on point 7.
So you cut out.
Am I talking over the top of someone?
You cut out just as you question, right?
In the previous slide, we had a point 7. It says inclusion of previous minutes.
That would, so what you do is in the first part of your minutes, you refer to the minutes that were signed off from the previous meeting, and the inclusion of the minutes.
I've got no sound.
Yeah. And the inclusion of the previous minutes goes into the board pack that goes out.
All right.
John, we can hear you now. If you would like to repeat your question, please, and maybe we have not understood you well.
Yeah, it was just the previous slide where it says what needed to be recorded in the minutes, I think was the heading, and it says to include the minutes of the previous meeting.
I think that's more expanded to the fact of the minutes of the previous meeting were approved, so you refer back to them.
Just we will say confirmation of the minutes as a true and accurate record. That's just one line, unless there are amendments proposed.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so as we've said, it's really important throughout the meeting, at each section of the minutes being recorded and agreed, that each agenda item you actually have consensus of the discussion in the minutes, any agreed outcome, any actions. Usually what you do is in italics in that section part of the agenda item is actually list out the description of the actions that were required from the meeting. For that agenda item, the wording, who's responsible, and date for completion. And what the chair would normally do is ask the minute taker, the company secretary or CEO, to read back to the meeting what their interpretation of that action item was, so that when you leave that particular agenda item and move on to the next one, everyone's in agreement for that. And that way, everyone's aware of what the action items will be coming out of the minutes and what will be going to people for actions, and completion dates, because the last thing you don't want in there is if you agree on a particular action item and it's unrealistic that the completion date is not going to be achieved. So it's really important that actually everything gets read back. Quite often people have different interpretations of what the description of the action item is. So you want to lock it in at that particular point of the agenda. And then also sometimes right at the end of the meeting, if there's only 2 or 3 action items, the chair might ask the company secretary before the meeting closes to read back the total action items in brief. Yep. Okay.
So Rob.
So that means that basically the directors are going to have to like pause a moment, and because if you're going to write down some of these motions or resolutions or action items or whatever, unless you're a speed writer, they're going to take you a moment or two. And if everyone's just then progressed on to some other point, you're then breaking into something, or you're trying to listen as well as what's going on. So I assume the directors need to have a little bit of pause and breathing in between at their sort of sections of activities, so that because they want the minutes to be reflective correctly as well. If they don't have that intention, then it's going to be difficult for the secretary to get stuff done.
Yeah, and you would normally do it if it's like a standard thing is finance report to be distributed or something like that. That's pretty easy. But if it's something that's a little bit controversial, or you've seen during the discussions that people have different views and everything, that's where I'd recommend you read back and pause, because then you can move forward with everyone knowing what the outcome is and what the action will be. Like I said, if it's just send a copy of a particular article, that's not a big deal. But if it's something that takes a bit of work, the management have got to do a fair bit of work, you want to make sure that you're not running off doing the wrong type of work, and what you give back to the board is not what they wanted. So if it involves a fair bit of work or anything contentious, it's in your best interest to pause and read that back, because then you get a better outcome. And if you don't, what happens I've seen is the next meeting, something comes back and the directors will go, oh no, that's not really what I wanted. So it goes over another meeting and another meeting. So you get it locked away at that meeting, and then you get presented back to the board what they asked for. So, yeah. So a good pause at controversial or detailed information requirements. Yeah. Sorry, Ansel, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Steve. On the minutes of electronic meetings, so the minutes which are held by technology because of the lockdown things, in case the meeting is held electronically, in the minutes, we should take care of typically 2 things. One, it should record the technology by which the meeting is held. So the meeting was held through Zoom, the meeting was held through MS Teams, or whichever way it is being held. And name of the directors who attended electronically and who attended face-to-face. So at 2 places, at least there should be a reflection of how the meeting was held. And in case the minutes are signed electronically, then it's important to retain the proof of authorization of individual who signed the minutes to the affixing of electronic signatures. So by email, the director gives authorization to the secretary that, yes, you can affix my signature. So it's important to retain that email where the chairperson has confirmed. And secondly, as a good governance practice, directors should pass a resolution or motion noting and agreeing that minutes will be henceforth or have been signed electronically. Just to make everyone aware, this can also form part of the board charter, where it can be clear to all the directors that the minutes are signed in this organization electronically. Now, when Steve said that there are certain things that should be there in the minutes, there are certain matters that we recommend should not be there in the minutes. And something like things which are already contained in the board papers that Steve has already spoken about, some unrelated incidents. So if Something like if it's a director's birthday and other directors are congratulating him, giving him bouquet, that need not be recorded in the minutes that his birthday was celebrated in the meeting. Summary of report of committees. So if you have committees like audit committee, remuneration committee, or finance committee, then the whole report of what happened at that meeting need not go into the minutes. Only a summary of information can go to the board, where the board is made aware of what the committees are deciding on. Votes of individual directors. So if there are 8 directors, what we are trying to say is we need not say that A, B, C, D voted in favor, E, F, G, H voted in against. All we want to say, the resolution was passed by majority or unanimously. That would help. Unless the dissenting director would want that my dissent should be recorded. In that case, we can put that X was not in favor of the motion proposed, and therefore X reserved the right of his vote or voted against, so that it's just made aware that only apart from X, other people voted in favor. Length of time spent in discussing individual agenda item. So we really do not want to specify that a particular agenda item the board discussed for 15 minutes. The next agenda item the board discussed only for 5 minutes. Maybe because it just gives the reader an impression how much time the board really spent. And it can be a reason for potential dispute where someone may argue that, oh, this was such an important agenda. The board spent very short time on discussing that. Rather, the board should have spent a longer time. So just to get rid of those potential disputes, we do not really want to put the length of time the board spends on discussing one agenda item. And we say that it's only the initial start time and end time. That is it. And last, amending the minutes with the events that arise between the board meeting and review of minutes should not become the part of minutes. So a decision that was taken at a meeting held yesterday, and today there is a subsequent development where the board thinks the decision might have to be changed. In that case, they cannot go back in time and change the decision. They have to go to the next meeting and say that, well, this was decided on, say, 4th of August, and on 5th, there was a development. So the meeting that is held on, say, 20th of August, we are deciding that we will not go ahead with that decision. So that will go only in the subsequent meeting minutes.
That's a really important point, because directors will come into a meeting and say, look, the information we got last meeting was X, Y, Z. Subsequently, there's been a development and we think we would have made a different decision or something like that. You can't go back and say to the previous minutes, they're approved subject to that change, because that was never discussed at that meeting. They need to go in the next meeting, and you sign off that further thing with further developments have shown the decision should be now, whatever it is, basically.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And this is just the quick takeaways from what we have already discussed. So when we are preparing the minutes, avoid to do the recordings. Rather, we would suggest take the hand notes or type notes if your typing speed is very good, and then prepare the minutes, because recordings can potentially put us into the trouble of having 2 records. Even if you're doing recordings, please delete the recordings once the minutes gets finalized. So in that case, retaining notes or recordings after the meeting, we should avoid doing that. Retain only the final minutes. Avoid using the words such as agreed for the decision items of the agenda. Rather, use the word resolved, which is not legally advised, but it is mostly used in practice. And if there is a ratification of any item, then avoid using the word confirmed, rather use the word ratified. The board ratified a decision that was taken between the board meeting by the chair or by the CEO because there was no meeting of the board. So things like that.
Sorry, Anshul, just to clarify that, what's the difference between ratification and endorsement and approval?
Approval is the decision, that is the board decides on a particular matter.
Yep.
Ratify is something that has been decided, but not at the meeting because meeting could not happen, but the board is confirming that decision that yes, we agree to what was decided before, though we could not meet together. So something like the
So that's a
circular
retrospective.
resolutions. Yes.
So ratification has retrospective decision confirmation.
Yes.
Okay. And what's the endorsement?
Endorsement is also, I think, agreed to the decision. It's approved only. Otherwise, I'm not sure. In what context do you use endorsed?
I see. There are a few. For example, like when I have to submit my decisions to higher authority.
Yeah.
I can only endorse. And that goes for the approval at the, because I don't have the ultimate power to approve that particular request or any
Maybe
decisions.
From your statement, it seems like it is a recommendation.
Because there are like delegations of authorities, and for some of the activities that I don't have the ultimate decisions authority to decide, and so but the ultimate authority should take my like perspective into that decision. So that then I don't know whether that's the legal term or not, but I heard that I endorse that, and then it goes to the higher authority. So just want to check with you if it has a legal meaning within it or not.
I haven't really come across, but from the thing that you're saying, I think it's sort of a recommendation that you recommend it. Maybe it's used in from that point of view.
It's probably what you're getting at is like the executive's endorsement or recommendation of the paper, and you'd put that in. And then, as Anshul said, the next step is actually, so that's like the executive type step. The next step is a board step where the board resolved to approve it or something like that.
Yep.
Board resolved. So I think what you're talking about is the executive, if you like, recommendation or endorsement is shown, and you can actually record that in the minutes to show that the CEO or whoever it was supported that particular paper. And then you subsequently go on to the board resolved, basically, which is the action out of it. Yeah, that might be one way to distinguish them. Yeah.
Okay, I have one question. I don't know whether it's relevant here or not, but where is the role of our ultimate accountability of CEO when CEO is just a member or a secretary of the board, and the ultimate authority rests on board members and the chair, or CEO is equally responsible like board members in some board decisions?
So if I'm not sure, are you talking about a company limited by guarantee? Under the Corporations Act, if we see the similar duties are casted on the directors as well as on officer, and CEO would be an officer in that case. So it's a section 9 of the Corporations Act that defines an officer, and all the duties that are casted on the directors are equally applicable to officers.
Okay.
Now that's the duty, which we say that the duty of care, skill, they should not be negligent and all these things. When it comes to minutes, the minutes are the minutes of the board, and board becomes responsible at that time because they are the members who are signing, approving, and they are the ones who are taking the decisions. So in that case, unless there is something done by CEO, if the decision is taken by the board and decision is not in the interest of the organization, in that case, the board becomes responsible.
Not the CEO.
And not the CEO. CEO is not the member of the board generally, unless your constitution says otherwise. So CEO is not the member of the board. CEO report to the board rather, and CEO assist in the board in doing its processes, assist the board in carrying out the duties of the board. So he's only assisting the board.
I think the best way to understand that too is in previous wording, a lot of people used to call the chief officer of the organization the managing director. Now we've moved into the chief executive officer to get away from that connotation that the senior person is actually on the board. The senior person is invited to the board meeting, and at various times won't be invited when they're discussing performance or salaries. The CEO doesn't get invited to the board meeting. So I think that's one of the ways that it has been distinguished going forward.
So is there a sort of a almost like a flow chart or some sort of set of most used phrases and things like that? So you've got use, resolved and ratified. Then there's, I've heard of for noting.
So we
are there other, later on, have you got some suggested? Okay, we'll get to there.
Yes. Yes, we have the templates which can suggest you the language that you can use while drafting the minutes, and you can use the template, and
okay,
yeah, that can be helpful.
Because there's some of these things like, make things succinct. So that's an interpretable phrase.
Yes.
You can look at something and say that's probably a bit verbose or it's a bit too succinct or whatever. But you can't actually teach someone to be succinct by telling them to be succinct. You've got to give them lots and lots of examples, and they've got to sort of look at them. And if they end up choosing the succinct ones that you agree with and the non-succinct ones that they say are non-succinct, then the person's learned something. But how do you actually teach someone to be succinct? It's only by judging what they do. So if we can see some examples of succinctness. I know every now and then you need to give one or two, but I actually like pages of good stuff and pages of bad stuff, so that I get a good, I sort of like there's enough repetition in my little grey cells to make the right connections and get the right judgments happening in my brain for when I want to write something myself. Just something
We'll discuss few examples we have got for you. But it's always hard to really find out what is the right definition of succinct. And let me be honest with you, like in my previous organization, each time the chair would change, the chair style would change, the style of preparing minutes would change, because some chairs would want to see things in a particular manner, some chairs wouldn't. So as the company secretaries, we can just let them know that this is what it is. But if the chair insists that, no, I like it this way, we anyway have to do what the chair wants. So it's just typical, and it's different from person to person.
Yeah.
But however, we will at least discuss the basic where we can improve.
Excellent. Yep.
I think the key is making sure, as I said at the beginning, if someone didn't attend the meeting, if they read the minutes, they had enough information to know why a decision was made or something like that. That's like a guiding principle in lots of it as well. But as Ansel said, it varies depending on the chair quite often as well.
Yeah, so I mean, my background is IT, and basically when you do something, you test it to see if it actually does what it claims to do. So I would sort of be thinking about what are the tests, what are the questions that are the test questions that you would ask of the minutes in about some issue. And like that, you just gave one example. If somebody wasn't there, would they actually understand the full seriousness of the issues that were considered? And to me, it's like why they chose A over B and C or something like that, to me would be fairly important. That you would like to, I would like to see that my board has considered a few other things rather than voted on something because somebody was thought it was a good idea and nobody else could be bothered thinking of anything. I'd like to know that there was only one option that they looked at rather than, considered four that were well argued and supported, but, on a balance of probabilities, we're going with A over the other ones.
Yeah, I think you described it perfectly.
All right. So if those sorts of quality criteria, I'll have to start my own. I'll send you a copy if I get any better ones. But that's the sort of thing that like people like us need at the beginning, I think, to rather than just because otherwise we don't have abilities to say, is this a good set of minutes to somebody? I mean, now in a sense, I could probably send you a copy and say, does this look like a set of minutes? I'm assuming you'll keep your mouth shut if you read something terrible. But it's sort of like, if I don't have a mentor or somebody who can, this criteria, then it's like, how do I actually know, is one of the things for an early stage minute taker to get used to.
There's some really good examples coming up.
Okay, you say that. I'll shut up now.
And so the rationale behind making those decisions. So if, as Rob said, that if there are 4 options, the 4 options board considered, and while selecting the option C, the board said that A is not viable because of so and so reason. The B looked reasonably good. However, we are not pursuing with B because of so and so reason. The D was rejected straight away because there were practical implications or whatever. And that's why C was selected, because C gives us A, B, C, D, E advantages. And finally, the decision is the C. So something like this. Use the words like the board discussed, deliberated, debated, questioned, inquired, or requested information all, because these words just makes the reader aware that the board was really intense into the discussions. The board had a session where everyone was involved, questioned, inquired. So it gives an indication that board was inquisitive about getting more information before taking a decision. And well-written and concise board papers facilitate drafting of minutes. So minutes can be effective if we have really good papers, because they become the base for the discussion of the board. So while we have effective minutes, we should also make sure that we have effective board papers as well. Conclusion. Steve, would you like to talk about this?
Yeah, look, we've covered a lot of things in the minutes. As we've touched on a number of times, the board needs to be regarded as a collective body. You might have disagreements on different items. Sorry,
Steve. Rajendra wants to say something, it seems. Rajendra.
No, sorry. I should have lowered the hand.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Steve.
No, that's fine. Look, this is just pretty much a reiteration of what we've discussed. Obviously, the board needs to be regarded as a whole, a collective body, and what they decided as a group. And as we've said, there's alternatives if you don't agree. The minutes need to be definitive so that people understand what the proceedings and outcomes were. And as we've said, it tells a story, a bit like we've talked about here, that you discussed the following alternatives. A wasn't right, B was not as good, and C was the best alternative for the following reason. So it tells the story of what the board members looked into before they made an informed decision, a very informed decision. And it's important that they show the practicality of what was discussed. And ultimately, there's legal implications if the minutes are not in full and complete disclosure. So anytime you're not sure, you should actually look through the minutes and make sure they do make sense. Very important. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So these are some minutes which we will decide what is the quality, but we will start maybe. It will be wonderful if you can all unmute and speak freely as to what are the problems that we see in these minutes. So let's see, is anything that you think can be improved here, starting from the top?
It doesn't have time, I guess. Call the meeting in order.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely. It doesn't have a time of the meeting.
Yep.
It also doesn't have a venue.
Yep.
We don't know whether the meeting is held physically or electronically, so there's no mention of time and venue. Great. Going next. Sorry, you're on mute, Rob.
Select board members means something special?
This is, no, this I think just board members. We may read it as board members.
Yeah, okay.
Well, with,
And
with the others,
for
it
the-
doesn't actually say where they're from or who they are or why they're there. in many respects.
Yeah, the
and
others.
we really don't know whether these are the only board members or few of them are apologies or things like that. So even if we have apologies, we would recommend that we should say apologies nil, so that at least we know that all the board members are there or few of them are absent. And all these people who are there, who are they? That's absolutely right. We usually would prefer using their designations. So something like a manager is attending, and then that manager, as Steve mentioned before, came for which item. So a marketing manager would come to attend a meeting, that's fine, but that person would come only to explain one or two agenda, and that person should be there only for discussion during that item, not for the whole of meeting.
Okay, on that, I have a question around it. A couple of questions here. Number one, somebody might say that, okay, I might not be able to attend the meeting. That's apologies. But if somebody said, yes, I will come and then doesn't come, what's that? That's still apologies or that's absent?
That's typically like technically absent, but I'm not sure what category we put it. We will we would say sorry, yes, Steve.
Probably say apologies. The only trick part is, I think Ansel's heading down, is some constitutions have, if a board member doesn't attend 3 consecutive meetings, they actually might be asked to leave the board.
Yep.
So this is the important part of recording it. Sometimes if the board member has given apologies before, then the chair will say, okay, we've been advised, so the 3 consecutive meetings is not relevant. But if they're just absent, like you said, we record them still as apologies, and you might put in bracket absent or something like that to sort of quantify it, because as a courtesy, all board members should send apologies before the meeting. And I think probably to distinguish it, put in brackets absent. It would probably be a good governance type requirement, because then if you add up the 3, that absence sort of might lead to the chair having a discussion with that director.
Thank you. And the second question on that is like, if a marketing manager is there for a particular motion or things, but that's just for the information sharing purpose, he would not be the part of, he or she would not be the part of that resolutions. Would he still record his presence? And
just probably
Yes.
2 parts
Okay.
there, probably 2 parts. Usually you'd head it up is, instead of the word other, you'd have by invitation. And as Ansel said, you might say agenda item 5, marketing manager attended.
Yep.
And what usually happens is the board thanks the marketing manager for attending, and they may ask, and then you'd record when the marketing manager leaves, and then the board would subsequently do a motion to a resolution based on that marketing manager's report. They're not necessarily in there when the resolution is passed. You'd actually probably ask them to leave before that, in case any board members might have a disagreement with the marketing managers, that they don't want to talk in front of the marketing manager. So the marketing manager would have a starting point, say coming into the agenda item, table the paper, discuss the paper, ask the following questions. Marketing manager left the meeting. The board had further discussions, you could possibly put, and the board then passed the following resolution.
Thank you.
Marketing manager.
Thank you, Stephen. Sorry to be too interruptive
that's
here,
perfect.
but sometimes what happens is it's not just the marketing manager. Like sometimes he would she would bring a couple of his or her assistants as well in the meeting, because he would not have every detail of the thing. So do we need to record everyone, or?
Definitely.
Okay, thanks.
Because then you get an understanding of what progressed during the meeting. And as we've said, if people want to understand how the decision was made, you then have the relevant experts named in the meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, over to you, Ansel.
Thank you, Rajendra. In fact, we would encourage you to please keep asking questions, because they are quite interesting and everyone gains out of them. So it's interesting to hear from you. Okay, let's go further. So we have covered this. Okay, on the content part, any observations?
There's lots of Eric Seds and Joe said. So there's lots of individual namings.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So we would encourage, please do not mention the names. Rather say that the board discussed this. A point was brought up for the discussion of the board and the board discussed, rather than using the individual name, who brought which point. So that's a great point.
So in that first one where it says Eric called, is that sort of like the meeting came to order, was called to order? Do you need to say who did it, or do you sort of use things like the chairperson called the meeting to order, or is that like hardly worth saying in the whole thing?
Yeah, we really don't need to say that, call to order. They would just say the quorum, being quorum present, the
Meeting commenced
chair commenced the meeting. Yes.
Should you actually say each time that a quorum was reached, that was there? I suppose you wouldn't hold the meeting, or you'd note it if it wasn't. It's assumed it was.
Agreed. You didn't need not even put that every time. That's usually we put with the general meeting things, that the quorum was present for a general meeting to start, but at a board meeting, we may skip that.
Mm-hmm. Is the agenda changes? Changes to agenda. Okay.
What do you think about dog seconded and motion was passed? Mike moved. So we would discourage using somebody moved and somebody seconded and then it was passed. So we would just say that it was discussed, and with whatever some changes or with no changes, the previous minutes were considered to be true and accurate copy of the minutes. That's it. Okay, I think we are pretty much done with these. Now we have another set of minutes. So do you think these looks a little better than the ones before? And any improvements that we can do here?
Still need the mechanism, technology or in person.
Yeah, so the venue
and
is missing. Yeah, absolutely. Here at least we have apologies.
The location of the meeting.
Yep. Jeff, you're on mute, sorry.
Unmute. No, just saying is with the present, we don't actually know whether they're board members or, well, whether it is a board member meeting either. You know, is it just a general meeting or a committee meeting or a board meeting or whatever?
Yeah, and in present also you're right. We would differentiate between the members of the board or the committee, and then we would put invitees or in attendance. So other people who are joining to explain board or to assist board with providing them brief on things. So the present also should be divided into the two parts. That's absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. The acronyms RDO, registered day off or something. So those sorts of things need to be spelled out.
Yes, absolutely agree. Avoid using jargons and acronyms. And can you see one peculiar thing? Can you note something very just at a glance, which was there in this part, but it isn't there here?
So the numbering?
Yes, we don't have agenda numbers. At least they should be corresponding to the numbers as to what is the sequence. So we don't have those numbers.
Yeah, and the way they've formatted all the bold beginnings makes you think, I have to is that a new what?
Yeah. Right. So it really, it's not letting us understand what is it all about. Are they sub-agenda like 1, 1.1, 1.2, or what exactly it's happening here?
The other important part is it doesn't really show if the minutes are actually signed by the chair or anything as well, and the dating of the minutes, as we've said at the beginning, it's really key, because otherwise it looks like a social club meeting or something as well.
Yeah, that's yep. Okay, then let's go to another example and see what's here.
Yep, so I've got.
This looks
So
better than the
looks-
previous
yeah.
ones. It's still formatted well. It says the meeting commenced at so-and-so time. There are people who are present in attendance. So these are typically members and somebody who attended other than the members. We have apologies nil, and this standing item of conflict of
yes,
interest.
conflict, yeah.
Confirmation of minutes is also there. The only thing we may avoid is this.
Mm-hmm.
And
Earlier on, under the opening prayer and welcome, Councillor Gilligan and Councillor Gilligan, is that something that would have, if it's in there, you would sort of assume that that's because it's a special, it's important that that councillor was known to be doing that? I mean, we don't know. Yeah, we don't know the content or anything. But if it is in there, then you would, and people are writing minutes well, then you would assume that it's because either the councillor or there's a protocol that says that person is known who
and
does
then
it.
Since it's not a substantial business item, it's just somebody saying prayer, so and welcoming members. So that seems to be very much insignificant to really get noticed. But otherwise, their numbering and sub-numbering, everything seems appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I'm not sure about is 538. I'm not sure what are these. Maybe some errors.
It doesn't appear to be a starting time. It doesn't show a starting time, I think.
Starting and ending time. Yeah, we probably don't get the whole.
Yeah. Okay, so this
those references could be the pages in the report.
Yeah, maybe that's maybe the board papers or the agenda papers. Yeah, but we really don't need them in the minutes. And this is what we recommend. So this is the template that we have prepared. So the minutes of the meeting of board of, you can put your organization name, held on so-and-so date and location. It's a physical location, or through Zoom commenced at so-and-so time. So in attendance, so-and-so chair, president, and then the other members will follow. If there are apologies, we have to put those apologies and inform board. And as there was a question that somebody send apologies before or is absent, we would recommend that these issues can be targeted in the board charter, where there is what kind of behaviors are expected from the board members is specified. There we can specify that if board members are unable to attend a meeting, they should inform in advance to the secretary or to the CEO of their inability to attend the meeting. That will be the expected behavior for a director.
One question on that, if I can jump in, is if they granted leave, let's say, well, I can't attend, but I've granted leave, does that count as missing a meeting if you miss 3 meetings in a row or something? Because you might
again, it depends on the wording in the constitution that you would have. So the number of constitutions that I have seen is they would say without the consent of the board. So the 3 absences will be without the consent of the board. So if you have taken a consent, then even your 6 absences won't count.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is rather just saying is apologies, you'd actually say, leave was granted or consent was granted or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's better practice. Usually what happens is the chair, if a person is not giving apologies and not letting the board know and is just not in attendance, the chair usually has a private discussion with that director before they do anything more formal, because then they might find out that at 7 o'clock on the evenings, they've got something else has come up that they can't attend because of, and they don't want to disclose that completely or something. So it might be a workaround happens or something, but usually there's a discussion happens between the chair and any directors that have been absent, or their priorities change or something as well. You know, directors change as well.
Can you have proxies in these sorts of meetings, and you would just list them as a separate under apologies proxies? And
we don't usually have proxies for board meetings. We do have proxy for the members to attend the general meetings.
Okay.
But because directors have their personal duties and responsibilities defined under the Act, we would not recommend directors to appointing their proxy to attend the meeting.
Okay. And if they can't attend the meeting, can they still read the papers and send in comments to be included in the discussion?
Yes.
And
so the meetings that I attend, what they would do is they would send their comments typically to the chair that I have comments on so-and-so agenda items. And while discussion, the chair would bring up front that Director X made a comment on so-and-so, and other directors would discuss to see if it's relevant or it's addressed, whatever it is.
Companies can always have alternate directors as well. You know, if you've got a company which comprised of various groups, so they represent just the prime director may not be able to attend, but if you want your organisation represented there, this is for
substitute
meeting of associations like
yes, that's right. But I believe the alternates are different from the proxies.
Proxies not, whereas an alternate director, is at the meeting is a full director in his own right.
Right. And alternate also, we would suggest that if the association is a member of association and that association is sending an alternate, that's fine. But individually, director should not be allowed to appoint another person as his or her alternate. So that right should not be given to the because that will be in that case a proxy only. It's just naming it differently.
But I think isn't registered at ASIC, an alternate director is registered basically as the person who wants the alternate. They do the nomination, but it also has to be approved by the board as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and it usually is for a time period. Usually you might say the alternate is appointed for X meeting and received in advance or something too, because then it can be documented and tabled that the alternative attended on behalf of.
Oh no, it would be attending on behalf of instead of.
Yeah.
Because it's the alternate director has all the responsibility.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The prime director does not have any response technically.
Technically, yes. Yes, and once you have those alternates, you'll have those laid down guidelines as well, when and what to be done to have an alternate on the board. Okay, so we have standing declaration of interest. So where the individual director will declare that he or she had an interest in XYZ matter or company where that individual would have shares or somebody is working there. Again, XYZ declared that so-and-so, which might affect their relationship with the association regarding matters to be discussed during the meeting. So all the interests to be declared in the start of the meeting, which will be recorded.
Does it actually say what the conflict is, or did they just, sorry, you don't have to say what your conflict is necessarily, because that could be personal, but it could be about, this doesn't actually say the particular matter in your example, but you would, like it might be a conflict if it's only when 2 matters out of the 8 or something.
So you would just say that I have a conflicting interest in item 5 and 8, and I would refrain from, voting and taking part in the discussions at 5 and 8.
And is that what's recorded in the minutes though?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Good.
And maybe at the start of item 5, that person would leave the room, and
Yeah.
after the 5 is done, that person would be called back.
Yep.
And you document that in the minutes. They left the room and when they came back. So.
Yep.
And we have discussed number of times the minutes of the last board or committee meeting. It's committee because you can use the same format for board or committee as well. So that's why it's a committee. So minutes of whatever last meeting held on so and so was adopted and signed by the chair. And usually this is the time when, if the meeting is happening within a month, usually the chair would get a confirmation and sign there only. So just an opportune time for the chair to sign. And then this is an action taken report, where board will take note of the action arising from the previous meeting and the progress that is made on those items. And we have a format for action taken report as well. If there are committee reports, they can just say that committee, the minutes should contain a record of the reports received from the board committees, such as audit and nomination committee. This ensures that delegations made by the board to committees receive appropriate oversight, and the board takes responsibility for resolutions arising from committee deliberations. So just to report back to the board what committee is doing and what decisions committee has taken.
And if you end up having things that arise from those reports, do you discuss
that will
them
go
and
into the
minute them later? No, you put them sort of further down in the general business or other. They should have been registered as something to talk about later on in the agenda.
Business arising from the committee meetings would go back to the committee meetings only, and that board need not see what's happening there.
But what if the committee has a problem with something in the report and wants to talk about what's been reported to them? Do you then have the big discussion about they shouldn't be doing that? Yes, they should, and this is why they're doing it. Or do you say, okay, we've got an issue, a new item for the agenda a bit further down? Because you can sometimes get stuck on, one controversial report and it throws your whole agenda meeting, it then squashes the things at the bottom and you'd maybe not get to some fairly important stuff if you just get sidetracked by.
You could put that under other business or something like that at the bottom. If lots of boards actually go through the administrative stuff quite quickly at the beginning, leaving the time for the strategic discussions, and then they always have other business or something right at the end to capture any of that stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully leave enough time, if the chair's monitoring the times, enough time to discuss it.
Yep.
If the agenda item is for approval, we would suggest that board unanimously or by majority, whatever the case is, pass the following resolution: resolve that the board approves blah, 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 whatever. And then after the board approves, here is the action items that after this decision, what is to be done, what action is assigned, whose responsibility will it be to carry out that action, and what are the deadlines that board would want to see that it's completed by so and so time. And then if there are strategic discussions, update on the strategic implementation, what's happening, and information, board noted the information contained in the board papers. And signature of the chair and chairperson signs here. Normally, once the action items are recorded under each of the agenda item, they can be put up in a tabular format like this. So sorry about this. Can I change it to, I'm not sure. Sorry.
Is it a PDF?
For this discomfort.
If it's a PDF, you should be able to flip it for a moment. Yeah.
If you can right click that is screen.
Okay.
Rotate.
And
rotate count clockwise.
Rotate clockwise. Oh, thank you so much.
No worries.
Well done.
Not a Mac user, that's good.
Okay, so we put here the meeting details for tracking purposes, and then what was the subject all about. Comment what exactly the board or the committee desired, And this we just copy paste from the minutes, whose responsibility it is, and what is the status that we want to update to the board, that, you know, it's reached to this and this state, or it's in process, or it has not been started as yet. And if it's in process, what is the proposed date of completion? So it just helps in tracking the actions. And that's it.
And if the board, if you don't actually discuss actions, sometimes there are sort of actions implied in a motion that sort of goes through, and people will sort of think, oh yeah, we've made a motion to we've confirmed the payment for the such and such activity. There's obviously an action that the treasurer has to actually go away and perform the payment process and pay them. Do you have to put those sorts of things in? Or
no, I don't think that is typically required. What is required is the major things that are required for effective implementation. So something that board would want to see that these things are done and then reported back to board, typically informing that board asked us to do 5 things, and out of 5 we have completed 3, and 2 will be done maybe next 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? We hope you enjoyed the session and you had few takeaways from this session.
Very much appreciated. Really enjoyable.
That's good.
And I learned a lot. So thank you so much.
Thank you
very much
for your kind words.
Thank you.